Hello staff, welcome to Executive Planning Day. Today we'll be discussing macroeconomics, tariffs and the trade war, behavioral economics and developments in AI. Firstly, this is obviously a part of CoSec Kadari Securities and the presentation will be by me, Max Hewitt. Firstly, starting off with macroeconomics. This consists of the economy on a larger scale as a whole or entirety. This could be on a societal, national, or global scale. The most dominant factors including the macroeconomy involve gross domestic production, GDP, inflation and unemployment. It is vital for a company like CoSec to thoroughly understand and analyze these key influences as a company involved in the market. The market is dictated by the macroeconomy. At CoSec, we are involved in stock exchange on a national level, being Australia. Therefore, having a deep comprehension of the macroeconomy will enhance business decisions and open additional business opportunities. The livelihood of CoSec is completely dependent on the flow of the macroeconomy. Gross domestic production. Moving on to gross domestic production, abbreviated as GDP, it is the principal form of measurement used to roughly quantify each country's level of output and income from goods and services produced in a market. The measurement is a gross amount in the macroeconomy of a nation. GDP or output can be calculated by adding consumption, investment, and government purchases with net exports. GDP is the most frequently used comparative tool for nations, as it can alternatively indicate the prosperity of individuals among each society. An increased GDP conveys that the production has grown outputs and income, whereas a decreasing GDP signifies an aggregate reduction in production and therefore output and income. Output and income generally correlate, as high-producing countries typically receive more income. This is demonstrated when defining first and third world countries. Countries with a high GDP are generally referred to as advanced or wealthy. Countries in Europe considered wealthy or advanced consist of Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal, and Finland. These countries together make up 93.2% of the continent's GDP, demonstrating an evident connection. Not only can GDP be used to determine living standards, but it can measure economic growth as well as identifying recession or expansion. By dividing GDP by the population of a country, it equates to GDP per capita. GDP per capita is a more accurate measurement as it accounts for the population differential attributing to an increased GDP. GDP isn't always a completely reliable measurement, however, as it doesn't always indicate a nation's well-being, as it fails to consider non-market goods, leisure, quality of the environment, and the underground economy. When an economy enters expansion or contraction, it is expected to experience the opposite in a weaker form. This generally occurs in short-run fluctuations. These accumulative alternating fluctuations form the business cycle, being either the expansion or the contraction. Identifying expansion becomes clear when a trough in GDP turns into a peak, whereas a contraction is the reverse. GDP in the business cycle is relevant to CoSec as a stock exchange business, as identifying a contraction from GDP would reduce investments compared to an expansion that will increase investments. Moving on to inflation and unemployment. Inflation is the aggregate heighten of prices in an economy. It is caused when a government purposely expands a country's monetary supply too fast. This is done to clear debt or initiate economic growth. Growth of inflation is continual, which decreases the value of the dollar relevant to the rate of inflation. Hyperinflation is an extreme level of inflation in comparison to deflation, which is when prices decrease and the value of currency increases. Real GDP is when GDP takes into account price changes and inflation. Inflation ultimately produces a level of unpredictability for companies and employees, impacting purchasing patterns. Consumer Price Index, CPI, measures price regarding consumer purchases. High inflation rates guarantee a higher CPI rate, meaning cost of living is more expensive. Studies have found that an increase of 10% in inflation rate on average amounts to a decrease of 0.24 points in GDP. growth rate. Therefore, an inflation continues, the economy will suffer. Grasping a deep knowledge for inflation at CoSec is vital as it creates immense pressure on markets our company is involved in. During a recession in the business cycle, inflations will slow down and speed up when the cycle enters expansion. Unemployment is when an individual is unable to find employment despite being willing to work. When the economy is thriving in expansion, employment rates are generally higher in comparison to during a recession. High unemployment rates generally mean individuals are generating less money to spend on the economy. Understanding how employment reduces spending. As a business, it is vital for CoSec to understand how unemployment rates reduce spending and eventually impact markets and stocks. Moving on to tariffs and trade wars. With the re-election of Donald Trump into office, the Australian economy and consequently stock market has suffered due to the variety of tariffs placed on Australian imports. For Australians, this has resulted in industries sacrificing profit margins due to the taxation implementation. This means Australian businesses are paying higher costs that impact supply and demand. Dividends and stock prices are reliant on profit generated by public listed companies. Since this tariff decreased profit margins, it will continue to impact share prices. CoSec operates off the share price, meaning if the share market takes a hit, so will CoSec. If this trade war continues on a majority of the market, it will be affected, impacting the stockbroking industry that CoSec is a part of. Our executive and staff should be monitoring the situation as this is the most impactful factor to the company in the short-term run. Now moving on to insights from behavioral economists. Behavioral economists is the study of how psychology integrates into business decision-making that shapes the economy. For example, there is a variety of reasons from a behavioral economist perspective as to why people still choose unhealthy food options despite preferring change. Firstly, it could be due to the irrational behavior, as traditional economists believe that 100% of the population always remains rational. However, this is false. Misperceptions are another reason, for example, believing the food is healthy or will be cheaper due to it being unhealthy. The framing effect may be involved, as people may choose the unhealthy food due to the way it is marketed or displayed. The priming effect can also be evident, which involves the question order impacting the response. Status quo bias is a main reason, as individuals may be unwilling to change their diet despite wanting to eat healthy. Understanding behavioral economics could be a strategy CoSec could adopt to gain a competitive advantage or advance marketing. Moving on to developments in AI and implications for inequality in the labour market. AI has led to extreme quantities of redundancies in workplaces worldwide, particularly labour. Therefore, demand for labour decreases. Consequently, this decrease leads to an increase in wages. A wage increase has two outcomes. Labourers will pick up more hours, sacrificing leisure time. On the other hand, they will work fewer hours as they can afford to sacrifice work opportunity for leisure. The economy finds that labourers have a tendency to pick up work rather than leisure. This increase in AI will create an inequality in wages for labourers. As AI continues to develop, more and more people will become redundant, growing this inequality. This will indirectly affect CoSec via the market. However, implementing AI at CoSec may reduce costs. Thank you, executive, for watching. We greatly appreciate your time. A set of references used in the information before is provided on the slide next.